Hi, and welcome back to Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy, where today we will learn about the Constitutional Convention in our series of Creating a More Perfect Union. After America issued the Declaration of Independence, we were launched into a war with the most powerful country in the world. And we learned in previous lessons how the new United States government had serious difficulties supplying General Washington's troops with supplies to fight the British because the Congress didn't have the power to tax. Without the power to tax, the Confederation Congress was forced to beg other countries and individual states for money. And that didn't go so well. America had created a confederation, a government in which the states had all of the power under its first constitution, the Articles of Confederation. In addition to lacking the power to tax, the government had only one branch, a legislature, but no one to enforce the law in the form of an executive branch, and no national court system. As we learned in a previous video, in 1786, a rebellion of disgruntled farmers, most of whom had fought in the Revolutionary War and were paid with worthless American money, took control of most of western Massachusetts, known as Shay's Rebellion. With a national government so weak as to be unable to put down this rebellion, or incapable of fixing the problems that caused this outbreak, many Americans had had enough of this weak central government. So today we will look at the gathering to write a new constitution to solve these problems. You will most likely be tested on the compromises that took place at the Constitutional Convention, such as the New Jersey and Virginia plans resulting in the Great Compromise, issues of slavery, such as the ThreeFifths Compromise, creating an executive or president and how to elect that president, and how power was shared between the national government and the states. And just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint with a variety of resources are available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Just click the link in the notes below this video or search for Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy at Teachers Pay Teachers. In September 1786, 12 delegates representing 5 states met in Annapolis, Maryland to discuss trade problems and other weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation in what became known as the Annapolis Convention. Led by the Virginia planter James Madison and New York lawyer Alexander Hamilton, they agreed to meet the following summer in Philadelphia to make changes to the Articles of Confederation. Madison and Hamilton knew they needed George Washington to attend the convention in 1787 to provide legitimacy, but he was reluctant to attend. News of Shay's rebellion and tireless letters from Madison and Hamilton convinced him to go. So, the Constitutional Convention in the summer of 1787. 55 delegates representing 12 of the 13 states met in Philadelphia in May of 1787. In addition to Washington, Madison, and Hamilton, the famous Benjamin Franklin attended. The attendees tended to be the elite figures of their state, many of whom had attended college at a time when this was very rare. Because Rhode Island was a no-show, the delegates were really breaking the rules of the Articles of Confederation, which required a unanimous vote to pass amendments. The delegates pushed on in secret, keeping the public out and the windows shut in the stifling heat. The delegates chose Washington to preside over the convention, as no one would question his selfless loyalty to the United States. However, he left most of the debates to the delegates. One of those delegates was James Madison, known as the quote-unquote father of the Constitution. Madison had his fellow Virginian delegate, Edmund Randolph, begin the convention by proposing his Virginia plan, calling for a strong national government. The Virginia plan called for 3 branches of government with a powerful bicameral or 2-house legislature. Now, Madison's plan would become controversial because he wanted both houses to have representation proportional to states' population. Madison's plan introduced an executive to become called the president, chosen by the legislature with limited power. Finally, he called for a judicial branch with judges who would serve for life. In addition, the Virginia plan gave the legislature the power to tax and regulate trade, both desperately needed and widely agreed on. Again, most of the delegates agreed with the Virginia Plan. They saw this as a solution to many of the weaknesses of the Articles. But there definitely were some concerns. Most importantly, proportional representation, or the number of representatives based on a state's population. Under the Virginia Plan, large states would dominate both houses of Congress, and in their eyes, for good reason. Virginia would say to Delaware, we have 10 times as many people as you do, and we'll pay 10 times the amount of taxes, so why shouldn't we have 10 times the amount of representatives? Small states would argue that under the Articles of Confederation, we had an equal voice, so why would we want to form a new government ruled by large states? In response, the small states put forth the New Jersey Plan. Introduced by William Paterson of New Jersey, it too called for 3 branches of government and the power to tax. But the main difference, as can be expected, would be a one-house legislature with equal representation for all states, just like Congress worked under the Articles of Confederation. The New Jersey Plan did fix a lot of the problems of the Articles of Confederation, but created a less powerful government than the Virginia Plan. Both sides held firm, creating a stalemate at the convention. So now was time for compromises, something our politicians today seem to need a lot of work on. The Constitutional Convention consisted of a series of compromises, or settlements of disputes, in which each side gives up some of their demands, most of which you will need to know for your exam. The first compromise came towards the beginning of the convention, in which the delegates had to decide whether to amend the Articles of Confederation or write a new constitution. They voted to write a new one on June 19th. Possibly the biggest compromise solved the stalemate between the Virginian and the New Jersey plans, called the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise settled the dispute of representation in Congress. Roger Sherman of Connecticut, which is why it's sometimes referred to as the Connecticut Compromise, suggested one house based on population, the House of Representatives, and one on equal representation, the Senate. And this is how our Congress continues to operate. Here is another look at the Great Compromise if you want to hit pause and write this down. Another heavily debated issue was the creation of a president. To the framers, they feared having one individual with too much power could lead to abuse. Some delegates thought the position should be made up of several individuals with a council of presidents. To many delegates, a single executive sounded an awful lot like a king. They also wondered how the executive should be elected. Their solution, the Electoral College. Some delegates felt that the president should be elected by the people, some by Congress. As a compromise, they developed the Electoral College. In the Electoral College, the people vote for electors who then cast their vote for the president. This system continues to be debated today, especially in light of our most recent election. Another issue that needed compromise was slavery, that elephant in the room that no one wanted to talk about. By the time of the gathering in Philadelphia, some northern states had already put in place the eventual abolishment of slavery. However, the southern states threatened to walk out of the convention if the slavery question was considered. As James Madison said, at the Constitutional Convention, the states were divided into different interests, not by their difference of size, but principally from having slaves or not having slaves. It did not lie between the large and small states, it lay between the northern and the southern. Now, ironically, southern slave owners like Madison and Washington, in addition to northern representatives, spoke out against slavery and would like to see it addressed in the Constitution. However, states such as South Carolina and Georgia threatened disunion as it was so central to their economy and lifestyle. Northerners knew they needed Southern support to hold this fragile agreement together. Slavery was such a sensitive issue that the word slave was never used in the Constitution, but references were made to it. One issue was the slave trade. The northern states had already banned the slave trade and wanted to prohibit it nationally. Southerners were extremely against this. As a compromise, the northern states agreed to put in a section stating that Congress would not interfere with the slave trade until 1808. The next reference to slavery came in what is known as the Three-Fifths Compromise. Southern states did want to talk about slavery when it came to calculating population representation. By counting slaves, Southern states would have more seats and therefore votes in the House of Representatives. The catch was that Southern states would also therefore pay more taxes. As a solution, the convention decided that every 5 slaves would count as 3 people. The Three-Fifths Compromise, in addition to just showing how much disregard people had for slaves, would have serious future ramifications on politics. Finally, another issue that delegates had was a lack of Bill of Rights. Many state constitutions contain listings of essential rights and freedoms, such as Virginia's Declaration of Rights. While many delegates argued that the separation of powers and checks and balances provided in the document made a list of rights unnecessary, other delegates were just tired of debating and wanted to return home before a Bill of Rights could be added. This issue would soon arise in the ratification debates. However, after a long hot summer, the Constitution was finally approved. On September 17, 1787, the delegates met to sign the Constitution. 3 delegates, Elbridge Gerry, George Mason, and Edmund Randolph, refused to sign. The 3 men who refused to sign signaled the debates to come over the new powers granted in the Constitution, as the document was sent to the states for ratification. Breaking the Articles law for unanimous approval, the delegates voted that only 9 of 13 states needed to ratify the document to go into effect. But passage of the Constitution would definitely result in a struggle and would create America's first 2 political parties, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, which is where we will pick up next time. But before we do, let's review. Why could the Constitutional Convention be considered unconstitutional from the very start? Well, only 12 of 13 states showed up, and the Articles required a unanimous vote to make amendments or changes. What was the name of the plan introduced by Randolph and written by Madison that kicked off the convention? The Virginia Plan. List at least one thing that was different about the Virginia Plan from the Articles of Confederation. Well, it had 3 branches. It had the power to tax, the power to regulate interstate and international trade, slavery issues. Which states favored the Virginia Plan? Large populated states. What was the plan proposed by small states for a weaker national government? The New Jersey Plan. What was the biggest debate between the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey plans? Proportional representation, or representation based on population in both houses. What was the name of the compromise that saw the difference between the Virginia and New Jersey plans? The Great Compromise, sometimes referred to as the Connecticut Compromise. What did the Great Compromise propose that made both sides kind of happy? The House of Reps, based on population, and the Senate, based on equal representation. What compromises were made on slavery? The Three-Fifths Compromise, as far as counting slaves, and that the slave trade would be allowed until 1804. What did the Three-Fifths Compromise state? It stated that every 5 slaves would count as 3 persons towards representation and taxes. What did some delegates feel was missing from the Constitution? A Bill of Rights. How many states were needed for the Constitution to go into effect? 9 out of 13 states. And that's it. I want to thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe, because up next we're going to look at that document, the Constitution. And just a reminder, teachers, that this PowerPoint with worksheets, smartboard activities, guided notes, flipped class videos, lesson plans, quizzes, Kahoots, and much, much more are available at Teachers Pay Teachers. Click the link in the notes below this video or search for Mr. Raymond's Social Studies Academy at Teachers Pay Teachers.